Good morning, class. Welcome to your art criticism PowerPoint video. This video is intended to introduce how to critique art and to discuss the criteria for art criticism so that everyone in the class understands how to complete art critiques and how to discuss peers' artwork, because that's part of the course and that's something that we're going to do for each unit, each project that we create. So with that said, some of you may have already seen this video from prior years if you are in 7th or 8th grade. If that is the event, then just review some of the slides to kind of brush up on your knowledge and understanding of art criticism, or you can watch the whole video through again. That's totally up to you. I'm going to try to make it as short as possible as we move through the information. So the first slide here, there's an image entitled The Art Critic, and it's by an artist named Norman Rockwell, who's a very famous American artist who, in 1955. That's when this painting was created. He portrayed people in America in everyday situations, just to kind of represent the Americana, the overall culture of people during the times. So in this artwork itself, you see a person leaning forward with a magnifying glass, and because the title is called The Art Critic, and you see a palette and easel over his shoulder with a magnifying glass, he's obviously studying the artwork. He's obviously an art critic. But the interesting thing, the ironic thing about this artwork is that the images themselves are looking back at him. You can see the woman in the photo that he's staring at is looking at him, and so is the gentleman over his right shoulder looking down like he's confused. So that right there is just a basic description of an artwork, which is the first step of art criticism. I just wanted to use this image as a neat example of how to introduce art criticism. All right, so we're going to move forward. The next slide, you have the world's first sculpture and art critic. So down at the bottom, you see three stones. The caveman on the left says, "Me call it snowman." And then the caveman on the right, he says, "Me call it waste of 3 rocks." Caveman on the right is probably lucky. Caveman on the left did not bash him upside the head with a club or one of his rocks, because he just insulted his work. So the point of this image is to demonstrate how not to critique, how not to provide negative feedback. Instead, you want to discuss artwork as it is and not give your subjective opinions to the work. So here's another image called the Early Art Critic. It's another caveman work. I don't know if the caveman on the bottom right is angry at the other caveman for drawing some kind of Sonic the Hedgehog looking character on his wall, or he just really doesn't like it that much that he's going to resort to physical violence. Of course, never resort to physical violence if you don't like something, but again, you want to leave those subjective comments and opinions out of it. And it seems like the caveman on the far left, I guess that's his left arm, but it kind of looks like a third leg. I don't know what's going on there, but overall, make sure you're not getting upset over something that you don't like. All right, so moving on to a more serious matter. The 4 criteria in art criticism are to describe what you see, to analyze the work, to interpret it, what you think the meaning is, and to evaluate it, to talk about the skill and the technique of the artist and the artwork itself. All right, so I'm going to move forward. So art criticism, the main thing here is that it has to be constructive, that top bullet. Please don't include any negative, demeaning comments. They are not tolerated. Now, I would never think anybody would do that on purpose, at least I would sure hope not. But sometimes people say things by accident. A lot of adjectives I hear are it's messy or sloppy or they didn't take their time, things like that. Try to leave those opinions or comments out. You could say things like, it demonstrates color well, but I think, stronger craftsmanship would strengthen the composition. Now, I know I'm using some art vocab here, but, you could say something like at the bottom here, I know he or she put a lot of time into this and it shows. You could say, I'm not sure what the artwork is expressing, but I do like this. So you want to say something that's constructive, something that they can read, they can understand, and they can take with them to apply to the work and to build upon their work itself. So please, at the bottom, there is the bullet here. It says you don't always agree with the critic because your criteria may be different from the professional critic. But after you learn the steps of art criticism, which we've already discussed, you should be able to critique art yourself. And then lastly, you'll learn different aesthetic theories for judging the merits of an artwork, enabling you to form your own opinions about works of art. So basically, the more art critiques that you take part in, the more you understand what creates a strong, successful artwork so that you can basically enhance your art criticism understandings. All right, moving forward. If I can get, there we go. So what are criteria for art criticism? Let's practice it real quick. This guy at the bottom right is really pumped down here. He's like, let's do it. All right, so let's do it. So here you have two images. On the left, you have an image called The Weeping Woman. It's an abstract painting by the artist Pablo Picasso from 1937. And on the far right, Man in a Beret by an unknown artist, but for some reason we know they were 14 years old, and that was in 1895. So the reason I'm showing both of these, you see the comments in the middle, which is better and why. The idea I'm showing both of these to you is because a lot of people value the detail, the hyper-realism of a painting, that the more realistic it is, the more beautiful it becomes. Whereas art isn't always about the realistic depictions of things. Sometimes the abstract artwork people enjoy even more. Often the abstract artwork, a viewer will say, oh, I can do that, that's really easy, anybody can just throw a couple shapes together. But the abstract artwork can open your mind to different interpretations of the same image. So one person could have one opinion of the image and someone else can have another opinion of it. Whereas the image on the right, Man in a Beret, it's literally just a man in a beret, that's all there is to it. Is it very technical and detailed? Absolutely. And if you appreciate that one better, that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. And if you appreciate Weeping Woman better because it's more colorful or you like the abstract nature of it, then that's fine as well. There really is no right or wrong answer here. The reason I do put both of these images up is because the truth is we actually do, or I actually know who the artist is on the right. And the artist on the right is actually the same artist from the left. It is Pablo Picasso. He was only 14 years old when he painted Man in a Beret. And then when he was older, I don't know the exact math on it, but when he was about 56, something like that, in his mid-50s, he painted Weeping Woman. So a lot of times people will see an abstract work and think that they are not a talented artist, they can't paint realistically. But a lot of times artists that can paint abstract work can actually do the detailed stuff, the hyper-realistic artwork, just like Pablo Picasso did. And he was only 14 years old when he did that. All right, so moving forward. So we've already kind of described a abstract work versus a realistic work, or specifically a painting. But here we have two sculptures. One is a famous sculpture by the artist Michelangelo. It's entitled The Pieta, and it was painted around 1500. And then on the far left, we have an unknown artist, and it really is unknown. I'm not tricking you this time. The title's unknown, the year's unknown, but the idea is to think to yourself which is better. Again, a lot of times students or people looking at this slideshow will say that the abstract artwork is better because they can interpret a different meaning, or the artwork on the far right has a very set, obvious meaning, because back in the 1500s, the faith of Christianity was at its highest, and basically any and all artwork was about Christianity, and this is the depiction of Mary and Jesus coming off the cross. And that story is being told you directly, it's pretty obvious. And then the one on the left, we don't know what the story of that is. And people come up with their different interpretations. I've had students tell me it looks like chocolate milk being poured into the glass, and the frame in the glass is just invisible, you can't see it. Or they look like it's a leaf and there's like water droplets like flowing off the leaf. So an abstract work isn't necessarily worse or better than a realistic one, and vice versa. You can have the opinion that it is, that it's fine, but it doesn't make one any less art than the other. So moving on to the next one, I'm going to kind of go through these a little faster. These just continue that theme of which is better and why, where one's a little bit more abstract. You have Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night, and on the left you have Thomas Kincaid's Hometown Morning, which each portray a town, an overall scene of a town, and that kind of at-home feeling, but one's more realistic and one's a little bit more abstract. And then here is where the slideshow gets kind of interesting, because on the left you have Johannes Vermeer's Girl with the Pearl Earring. It's a very famous painting, and again, this was painted in 1655, around the time people were still very focused on the hyper-realism, the beauty of art, painting as realistically as possible, learning the technical skill. But then in 1917, you had an artist named Marcel Duchamp who literally took, and I'm not a weird, crazy art teacher, this is literally art history here, believe it or not, where this artist, if you will, took what is a bathroom urinal, which is absolutely disgusting, and I hate even saying it, but he took it and he put it on a pedestal and said, this is art. He didn't produce it, he didn't create it, he just took it, put it on the pedestal, and said, this is art. So that leads us to the question of what is art? and here you have the Peanuts here from the Charlie Brown comics, and Lucy here saying, but is it art? So then the discussion becomes, is it art? Is he the artist? A lot of times students say no, and I completely understand it. If I saw this in a museum, I wouldn't give it the time of the day. I'd probably make a face and keep walking. But what is interesting, the reason I'm bringing this up and why we need to talk about it is because technically it is art. You don't have to like it as art. It wasn't created by Marcel Duchamp, but it was produced by someone somewhere. Some manufacturer, some company designed that to be round with a certain amount of designs in different places. It could have been blue instead of white. It could have been angular instead of rounded. They could have had paintings and designs on it instead of just one solid color. So it was designed, it was created, it's art, but we see it more as just a functional object. We don't pay attention to the art behind it. But just as much as your shoes or clothing, even the table or chair you might be sitting at, they were all designed and created, so therefore it is art. But then you have the argument, is Marcel Duchamp the artist? And then you get into the conversation of the idea versus the product. So Marcel Duchamp had the idea. He may not have created the product, but the idea to challenge the art world for what they considered to be art at the time. And he opened up the doors for all these abstract artworks and all these different paintings to just challenge the idea of art. So in a way, he is the artist, because sometimes the idea is more important than the product itself. Many of you may have seen Andy Warhol's Campbell's Soup Can, or the Marilyn Monroe prints of Marilyn Monroe 4 times over with different color contrast. And the thing about Andy Warhol, we all consider him a famous artist if you've heard of him, but he never made a single artwork. He actually had a studio of people make these artworks, and he would sign his name to them, and he would get the bulk of the profits. Of course, he would pay his staff, but he was the artist because he had the idea. He told people what to do, how to do it, and they did it. But without his idea, the artwork never would have been created. So there you kind of have the idea versus the product. So I respect anyone's opinion, or if you even disagree with that that viewpoint or that discussion that we just had. But it is meant to just kind of open your eyes beyond just the product or just the idea as to what art is. Art doesn't always have to be beautiful and realistic. It can be abstract. It can challenge your perception of what art is. You don't have to like it anymore. You're entitled to like any artwork you want, but it is technically art. So then we talk about defining good art, defining bad art. There really is no good or bad art. It's really just subjective or objective. So to discuss that a little further, we kind of discussed this earlier on, where subjective art or a subjective feedback is feedback that's based on your personal feelings, tastes, or opinions. And the opposite of that is objective feedback. Objective feedback is not influenced by personal feelings or opinions, and you only represent the facts. So subjective words are often used in forming an opinion and assessing art. So at first you may first think of your thoughts and feelings of your experience, but they're not objective. They're not helpful to the artist when giving a critique. You want to give an objective feedback. You want to keep those personal subjective feelings aside, and you want to give objective feedback that focuses on the artwork's physical characteristics as the main source of information. The physical and visual qualities are discussed, not your likes or dislikes regarding the work. So that's a really important thing to remember as we move forward. So the first step of approaching art critique is to look at it, to begin to develop an informed or objective opinion. So sometimes, though, it's hard to separate that subjective opinion, because if you're happy and you're looking at it, you may love it, but if you're upset, you may not like it. So you want to, again, try to separate not just your opinions, but your personal feelings at that moment, at that time, to view it subjectively, but discuss it objectively. So we must respect the artist and his or her feelings. So what's our criteria for our criticism? Basically, an art critique is a detailed analysis and evaluation of a work of art. While no two people experience the same reaction to a work of art or interpret it the same way, there are a few basic guidelines you can follow to achieve a thoughtful, thorough critique. The basic elements of an art critique are to describe, analysis, interpret, and judge a work of art. So basically, as we end this video here, just make sure your feedback as we do critiques for this course are kind, they're very specific and objective, and they're also constructive, they're helpful. You want to give them feedback and things they can take with them to improve it. So art's not good or bad, it's just different, and just because you don't like something doesn't make it bad. Discuss the strengths in the artwork, not the weaknesses, and there's always room for growth. All right, guys, that's the end of the slide. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I look forward to your sample critiques for